Good morning, everyone. Welcome. So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Bianca Michuda, and I am the Community Engagement Specialist with the Development Services Department. We're so happy to have you here today, and thank you for joining us for the third session of the Land Development Academy. We're still so excited getting this kicked off. We've had a great reception. Last week, we had an introduction into site plans with Site Plan 101. And today we're going to continue that discussion a little bit deeper with Site Plan 102. And the Land Development Academy sessions offer a deeper look at the site plan review process. We have experts from across the City of Austin departments who work with site plans that are joining us for all of the Land Development Academy sessions. And it looks like we have a good number of participants with us today, and I still see more joining. And I appreciate everyone who's here. If you could help us to track the attendance. I've heard that there are some groups who are joining, maybe they registered with one name, but there might be maybe a conference room full of coworkers and colleagues. So if you're here with more than just yourself represented today, go ahead and find the chat box and let us know how many people are in the room with you today. If you're just by yourself, you don't need to do that. But if you've got a couple people with you, let us know. Before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and quickly review the engagement format for today's meeting. We have 1 hour set aside for today's program. And we're going to start with a presentation and close with a Q&A session. So questions can be posted to the Q&A bank by selecting that option that's at the bottom of your screen. So it is different from the chat function. It has a little question mark and it says Q&A on it. And you can ask those throughout the presentation, or you can ask questions verbally at the end of the session by using the raised hand function, which is also at the bottom of your screen. So if you're having any issues with either of those functions, you can chat the meeting host and we'll go ahead and troubleshoot any issues if you're having any. And a side note, while we hope to be able to answer all of your questions, there may be some questions that we don't have information for, and maybe we might run short on time. So for any of those situations, we will post a follow-up response. There'll be a Q&A summary sent out to all the attendees after. And so I'd also like to note that today's meeting is going to be recorded. We are recording right now. And so you'll also receive a link to the presentation and the recording. And that's everything that I have to say to welcome you. And now I'm going to hand it over to Christine Barton Holmes, who's going to be our presenter today. Thank you, Christine.
Morning, everyone. Christine Barton Holmes. I'm the program manager over the site plan review team within land use review within Development Services Department. And this presentation is going to build on Site Plan 101, if you were in that one last week. So we are going to take a deep dive into code. We have a lot of specialized zoning overlays, so we are going down the rabbit hole together this morning to learn what all of those are and how they work. Next slide, please. So we have many, many layers of code, many delicious layers. In addition to the base zoning, there's at least one overlay that is going to impact development on virtually all parcels in Austin. Of course, there's the exception that proves the rule, but generally speaking, you're going to have your base zoning and then you're going to have layers on top of that. Next slide, please. So it is a real alphabet soup of zoning letters, and they all mean something. They all are short for something or indicate additional requirements and have different uses and purposes. So fun fact, the longest zoning string in the city at least as far as I know. There might be longer ones now, but for many years it's been the Continental Club on South Congress, which is zoned CS1, VHCO, NCCD, ETOD, DB NP. So there's a couple of other letters they could have added to that string, but they have most of them. And what all those mean, to break them down, the CS1 means that they can serve alcohol. The V allows vertical mixed use, which provides for usually commercial uses of some kind on the first floor, and then residential above. And if it's got the V in it, then it's always going to have affordable housing as part of that. H means that it's a historic site. CO is a conditional overlay that's added at the time of zoning, and those are usually things like limits to trips per day or limits of certain uses. The NCCD is unique. It's part of Neighborhood Conservation Combining District, which is, we'll get into that a little bit later. It's a very specialized part of or type of zoning that is used in a few places throughout the city. And then the newer ones are the ETOD. They can use the Equitable Transit-Oriented Development Overlay. And then the DB ETOD is the same, but it adds some additional requirements, and it also adds a density bonus. So they can build taller and have more residential units. And last but not least, NP means that it's in a neighborhood planning area. So we're going to dive into these different letters and what they mean and what they do in this presentation. Next slide, please. So the intent behind all of these letters is to encourage a range of housing for everyone, everything from a single family house on a half-acre lot all the way to towers downtown with hundreds of apartments in them or condos. They're also intended to preserve community character and protect the environment, and also provide various options for getting there and meeting that intent. So not every overlay adds a letter to the zoning string, but every overlay does contribute to making Austin, Austin. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of tools in our tool chest for reviewing for the zoning. My team reviews site plans for commercial uses when they're submitted to see if the use is allowable, and to give entitlements to that site to be able to build a commercial structure, whether it's a 7-Eleven or a 90-story tower. And one of the key things we do is check the zoning. And we start out with the base zoning, and that stack of binders you can see, that is the zoning code. That's what it would look like if you printed out everything on Unicode. The gray binders are all of the criteria manuals, and then the dark red binder is one of several binders for the land development code. So we start with those, with the base zoning, and then we move on to see if it's in a regulating plan, or if it's ETOD or East Riverside. It takes a lot of coffee to go through all of that. Property profile is absolutely invaluable to figure out what zoning applies to which site. If you haven't used it, I highly recommend. We'll provide a link for that at the end of the seminar. And it is a very, very useful tool that we use many times a day. And then, of course, Amanda, our database, where all of these plans and reports and everything live. Next slide, please. So the overlay process, it starts at the rezoning stage with the planning department, and they can be added at the parcel level or neighborhood or citywide. The additional requirements that they add are reviewed for at the site plan and at the building plan stages. So we check for any neighborhood planning area requirements, any conditional overlays that are specific to a given parcel. So depending on the number and the type of overlays, the applicant may need to add additional plan set sheets to help illustrate compliance with all of those different additional requirements beyond the base zoning. Next slide, please. So we have really 4 types of development permits now, and these are what determine what gets built, how the entitlements are approved. The A plan just allows a use. It's use only, no construction. The B comes after the A, and that does permit construction, but it doesn't define what use is allowed. So it's typically done after an A plan. The C is probably the one we see the most often. It's consolidated. So A use plus B construction equals C consolidated. It allows the use and the actual moving dirt. And anything that's flat work or outside the city limits, so in the extraterritorial jurisdiction or ETJ, that's going to be a D plan. And then the T plans, we don't see those much anymore because they allow for offsite parking, and we don't have parking requirements anymore. But you might still see a few plans around where there'll be an AT or a CT, and that just means they came into an agreement with their neighbors to share some parking. And those are added to the site plan case numbers. Those are part of the zoning strings. Next slide, please. So if it's an A case, typically it's going to go to commission, sometimes council, depending. These are projects that require additional levels of approval from the Land Use Commission. So conditional use permits, hill country roadway overlays, big box ordinances. So for example, the HEB at Slaughter in South Congress is over 100,000 square feet. So they went through the AB process to get their conditional use permit. And anything zoned P or public, which includes everything from pocket parks to major utility facilities. Those all have to go to commission if they're over an acre. And commission also approves waivers to certain compatibility and environmental standards. And for compatibility, those go on to council afterwards. And then the environmental board advises the commission on the EV waivers. So these are all different layers and processes of review that we look at. A lot of them are related to the overlays that a site may have. Next slide, please. So we have a number of overlays that don't add any letters. We have subchapter E, compatibility. Those apply citywide. Subchapter E applies to every commercial project in the city, both full and limited purpose jurisdiction. Compatibility, if it's triggered, applies anywhere in the city. Depending on zoning, there are a few zonings that have their own version of compatibility. Waterfront overlay for parcels on either side of Town Lake, and conditional uses, which are the ones that require a little bit of extra oversight. The University Neighborhood Overlay, or UNO, which is up near campus, and then the Hill Country Roadways. Next slide. So to just give a quick overview of what all of those are, subchapter E is intended to encourage a really good urban form. And by urban here, we don't necessarily mean right downtown. It's just an area that is developed. So it could be up around Arboretum or William Cannon, and we would consider that to fall under the overall umbrella of areas that are developing that are considered to have urban form. They ensure that the new development reflects its location and its context, so it doesn't stand out like a sore thumb. And it supports the existing and planned neighborhood to continue the context that's already there. And the big thing about Subchapter E is it encourages different ways to get around. Um, it encourages not just cars, but also trains and buses, bikes, walking. It helps create a comfortable and safe pedestrian-friendly environment while also acknowledging that people use a lot of different ways to get around the city. Next slide. So subchapter E, the tools and requirements, it is mandatory. As always, there are the exceptions that prove the rule. They encourage attractive and usable streets, places that you want to walk around in because they have shade and the buildings are built up closer to the sidewalk. So there's no big, dark, scary gaps where, you know, people might be hiding or something like that. You've just got this very nice streetscape that's lined with buildings. The regulations are more restrictive on high traffic streets. So like North Lamar, South Lamar, Burnett, Congress, as examples, the requirements there are a little bit more stringent than they might be farther out in the suburbs. And we can negotiate. The code gives us the ability to negotiate alternative equivalent compliance, or we call it AEC, to make sure that the intent and the goals of subchapter E are met without necessarily meeting the exact letter of the law. So it gives us all some flexibility if a site can't meet the exact requirements for whatever reason. Next slide, please. So subchapter E covers a lot. It covers the sidewalk design. We want to have those shaded sidewalks. It's Texas. It gets really, really hot. So shading along the sidewalk, in the parking lots and the main entrances is required. You can do that with trees or awnings or a combination thereof, building overhangs. The building needs to be closer to the street with parking to the rear or to the side, especially on those more high importance, high traffic areas. You have to have entrances available on the sidewalk. So if you're walking along the sidewalk, you see where the entrance is, you're able to get to it from the sidewalk rather than having to go around the building and into the back. If it's over 2 acres, you have to have some on-site open space, and that can take the form of a grove of trees that's left preserved, or a picnic area for staff and customers. There's a lot of different options. We've seen some really cool open space kitchen gardens in a daycare, for example. It's one of the neat ones. They have to provide connections between the adjacent property, and one of the big things is also screening. You have to screen the mechanical equipment, the air conditioners. You have to add more windows so you get more daylight into the building. You have to screen and hide the dumpsters, that sort of thing. So it basically all boils down to creating a comfortable and safe environment for anyone to be able to use. Next slide, please. So the alternative equivalent compliance is where we get to have a little bit of fun. The code says that, quote, to encourage creative and original design and accommodate projects where the particular site conditions or the proposed use prevents strict compliance with this subchapter, alternative equivalent compliance allows development to occur in a manner that meets the intent of the subchapter, yet through an alternative design that does not strictly adhere to the subchapter standards. So it needs to be something in line with what the requirements are, but not necessarily the letter of those requirements. You basically allows compliance to take a different form. And we typically see it for sites that have a lot of topography or a lot of heritage trees that they're working around, or a site where maybe there are already several buildings there and maybe they can't bring the building up to the street because there are other buildings in front of it. Usually takes the form of additional amenities or enhancements on the site, but those are also typically keyed to what makes the most sense for that project in that area and what they're seeking relief from. Next slide, please. And the next one is compatibility. This is Article 10 in Chapter 25(2), Subchapter C. And this protects single-family neighborhoods and two-family neighborhoods, traditional, low density, excuse me, from the effects of the nearby more intense commercial multifamily uses, industrial uses. It does that by reducing the permitted heights near the houses and increasing the setbacks. So it creates a buffer between the lower intensity residential uses and the higher intensity ones. And there are also strict noise and glare and parking and design standards. So no mirrored glass. You have to screen your air conditioning, as with subchapter E. You have to have some landscaping and usually some fencing. A mixture of landscaping and fencing typically works best to help buffer noise and light from adjacent uses. The compatibility section was recently overhauled. That's the graphic that you're seeing there, shows the result of that overhaul of the code. The original compatibility was written in 1983 and hadn't really been significantly updated and was really meant more for the Austin we had in the early 80s than the Austin we have now. So we revised it. It does allow for greater height and allows for some things to be in the restricted zone, like parking. That was also based on what we used to see for compatibility waivers. It allows sites that are much smaller to still be able to provide compatibility and functional parking and that sort of thing without needing waivers. Next slide. So the waterfront overlays, there are 16 of them, and you can see them highlighted in the kind of turquoise blue on the map on both sides of the river. And they are intended to protect the environment, first of all, and then also make sure that they're not built out to preserve the integrity of the waterfront, to make sure we can see the waterfront and that it's visible and accessible and enjoyable to everyone. And it does that by limiting height of what can be built there and limiting impervious cover, which is basically any hard surface that rain can't percolate through. So buildings, sidewalks, parking lots, those are all impervious cover, and those are all limited along the waterfront. Next slide. So a conditional use permit requires additional oversight. It's a use that is permitted, but just needs additional review because typically they may have a significant impact on neighbors. Typical examples would be cocktail lounges, daycares in a couple of zoning districts, late hours cocktails. So if you're enjoying a mimosa at Kirby Lane at midnight, they have CUP. Also, recreational uses. So if you have a subdivision and it has a pool and playground and amenities like that, more than likely they would have had to have gotten a CUP for that. And the commission will hear the request and they can approve it, they can deny it, or they can approve it with conditions. And the conditions are usually limiting hours, limiting traffic, when trash pickup can occur, that kind of thing. Next slide. So Hill Country roadways are the roads you see outlined or highlighted in the map there. And they are intended to preserve the greenery and the open space typical of the Hill Country. So you could be more or less in the middle of the city and driving along 2222 or Southwest Parkway or 620, admiring the views, looking at big, beautiful trees, trying to figure out where the target is because they have increased setbacks and they require uh, preserving a lot of natural area. I believe it's 40%. And again, they limit impervious cover because they're also typically in environmentally sensitive areas within the city, within watersheds. So those are intended to preserve the feeling of being out in the middle of the hill country, wherever you are in the city, the western part of the city. They do require land use commission approval, but the condition or the commission can't impose any conditions. They can only approve it or deny it, or in rare cases, grant waivers if those are requested, but those are very rare. Next slide. The University Neighborhood Overlay, or UNO, is, of course, near campus, and it's also designed to foster a denser and more pedestrian-friendly environment and also provide affordable student housing. As anyone who's driven near campus in the last few years has noticed, it allows for increased heights and density. We have some pretty tall apartment buildings going up over there. It also requires some streetscape enhancements because so many people walk. It's what students do. And it also helps preserve existing legacy affordable housing in other parts of the city because we're increasing the affordable housing for students in this area, which encourages them to be closer to campus, which allows other affordable housing to remain in the city and be available for anyone. Next slide. So these are the overlays that do add letters to your zoning string. We have the transit-oriented developments, or TODs. Those include, but are not limited to, Plaza Saltillo, the North Burnett Gateway, and East Riverside Corridor. We have the neighborhood planning areas, the conditional overlays, and these are conditional overlays that are done at the time of zoning, not like the conditions that commission can apply. The historic overlays, and then New Kids on the Block, DB90, ETOD, and DB ETOD. Next slide. So the neighborhood plans, conditional overlays, and historic districts designations. Neighborhood plans are NP. Those are all located within the city limits. They're mostly in the more central parts of the city, and they can govern allowable uses and development standards. And these are put in place with a zoning case, typically a zoning case that will include all or most of the parcels within a given neighborhood. So Hyde Park is an example of one, South Congress. They preserve the character of the neighborhood and help make sure that what makes that neighborhood special remains. A conditional overlay is also added at the time of rezoning, and that will be the CO on the zoning string. It's usually things like trip limitations or use restrictions. And the use restrictions are usually going to be things like tattoo parlors or pawn shops, that sort of thing. And then the historic and historic district, buildings that are over 50 years old require additional review by the historic preservation staff to see if they have architectural or historic or social significance and should be preserved. The H is for individual structures, like buildings, and also all the moon towers are historic. And then the HD is for a historic district. And we have both local and national historic landmarks and districts. Next slide. So the NCCDs, these are very specific to certain neighborhoods. They are parcel specific. They are created by rezoning, and we think of them as sort of a predecessor to the TODs. They're not necessarily transit oriented, but they are primarily downtown, older neighborhoods, and they provide very specific requirements for height and setback, historic preservation, uses, that sort of thing. So they really drill down into what makes a given neighborhood special and are written specifically to preserve that. The first one was written in 1986, and the most recent one was, I want to say, about 10 or 15 years ago. So it's a tool that we still use. We update them periodically. Examples of some of the NCCDs include East 11th Street, just east of 35, Hyde Park and North Hyde Park, South Congress, all of the new buildings that have gone up recently, those were built under a NCCD, and then Fairview Park. Next slide. And the TODs, or transit-oriented developments, have what's called a regulating plan. These are also very area-specific. They foster a more urban environment, like Plaza Saltillo, as you see below. They are often centered around train stations, but not always. Sometimes they're designed to create additional support for future transit, like East Riverside. Support for the bus lines that run on East Riverside, and then for the eventual, hopefully, future light rail. They have internal districts within the TODs. So you might see a site that says TOD-MU, which is TOD-mixed use, or corridor uses, or each one is just a little bit different. And the internal districts will have different uses and density and design standards. And some of these also have their own version of compatibility, or they just don't have compatibility apply within, because they are typically very dense, very mixed use. And they are intended to encourage walkability and good urban design. Next slide. So DB90 is one of our brand new zoning districts. It is what's called a combining district, which means that it's added to the base zoning. So any of the districts that add letters to the zoning strings are considered combining districts. And DB90 allows for a greater height and also some relief from some of the development standards like setbacks, floor area ratio, in exchange for affordable housing. The maximum height is increased to 90 feet, hence the 90. Sites can go up to 30 feet over base zoning, and the one we see the most is CS zoning, which allows a maximum height of 60 feet, so 60 plus 30 is 90 feet tall. It does waive compatibility. Most of them are going to be located along pretty high traffic, high density corridors, so they don't have the compatibility that would apply. And they are pretty comparable to vertical mixed use in terms of the product that they produce, except for the height being allowed to be greater and compatibility. Vertical mixed use does still have compatibility. Next slide. And then we have the ETODs and the DB ETODs. And these are area-specific zoning districts. Landowners can opt in, and they can ask to be part of an ETOD within these specific areas and have that added to their zoning string. The ETOD specifically restricts uses that are not transit supportive. So that would include more auto-oriented uses, more of the heavy industrial uses. Some of those are outright prohibited, and some of those uses are conditional, which means they'd have to go to the Land Use Commission for final approval. And DB ETOD builds on that and adds the density bonus for additional entitlements and modified site development standards for affordable housing and redevelopment protection. Next slide. Okay, so the last element that we have, and PUD has base zoning, but it replaces a lot of it. These are basically dealer's choice. We have planned unit developments and planned development areas, and these basically allow applicants to create their own zoning. The proposed zoning, what they're wanting to put in place on the site, has to meet or ideally exceed what they would typically be allowed to do. So it would need to have more sustainable elements, a little bit more open space, community amenities, that sort of thing. They are used to achieve higher density and more creative and sustainable site design than would be allowed under just the base zoning. So Brody Oaks is one of the most recent examples of a PUD that's proposed group of buildings. Some of them, I want to say the tallest up to about 20 stories at South Lamar and 290. Miller is a PUD. The domain is a PDA. And the difference between the two, PDA typically keeps their base zoning, which is typically light industrial. So you'll see LI-PDA. And those areas usually stay more industrial. And the domain started life as, I believe, IBM and some other more industrial areas, more research-oriented areas. And parts of it still are, as it sort of evolves to become more of almost like a second downtown, but there are still those industrial elements. Miller was a sealed airport, so it's more residential. Both may have mixes of uses. Some of them, PUDs are very, very similar to PDAs. Some of the PDAs are more purely industrial. Next slide. And these are our resources. Some of the ones that I mentioned earlier, Unicode, all of our site plan processes, and then property profile, which is pretty much permanently bookmarked and open on everyone's laptop at work. And then Land Development Academy, if you want to see some of my colleagues' presentations as well, the link is there. Next slide. Okay, that wraps up Site Plan 102. If you have any questions, you can email me. You can email any member of the site plan team. That's my email address below, and then our resource email that all of us check periodically, daily. So any questions, any more information, any links or handy hints or anything like that, we are more than happy to provide that for you. Thank you.
All right, so that takes us to our Q&A portion for today. And again, thank you all for being here with us. I want to remind us that there are two ways that we can ask questions. One option is to post a question into the Q&A bank by clicking the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and I'll read your question and Christine can answer. The other option would be to ask your question verbally. And to do that, you can raise your hand by clicking the raise hand icon, which is also at the bottom of your screen. And I will call your name and Zoom will prompt you to allow your account to be unmuted. And just to make sure that we're getting all of our questions answered in both formats, I'll be toggling between the two. And I'll go ahead and get started. I see someone has been very patient with their hand up. Let's see. This is Anil. Go ahead, Anil. What's on your mind?
Hi, sorry about that. I didn't realize I had my hand up, but oops, sorry. Yeah, I just I guess I guess my question would be, is there support for ADUs in the permitting process?
Yes. There are a lot of possibilities for ADU. We have what's called Site Plan Light coming online next month that will allow a shorter permitting process for 5 to 16 units. I know ADUs, you typically just build one, but those are allowed in almost all residential single-family zoning districts throughout the city. And those would go through the residential permitting process.
All right. Thank you. Next question I have here is in the chat from Leigh Ziegler. Oh my goodness, ma'am, I am going to have to get back to you about how to say your name. I apologize. Is the VMU vertical mixed use being outphased for DB90, or will it remain anywhere?
It is not being phased out. It's a tool we see used a lot. We probably won't see it as much with DB90, but to my knowledge, VMU isn't going anywhere.
All right. And our next question from Jeffrey: how to administratively remove a plat note placed to avoid assessment of parkland dedication fees?
Ooh, that's a good question. And not one that I would really be able to answer, but Chris Yanez is my counterpart for subdivisions. So he would be a good one to talk to about the process for removing plat notes. And Scott Grantham is over in Parks and Rec, and he would be a good one to ask about the parkland dedication fees.
Okay. And on everyone's behalf here, I can follow up with those folks about this question, and we'll include the final answer in the Q&A summary, which will be emailed out to all of our attendees today. Are there any other questions? I think we've gotten through everything in the Q&A box. If anyone is still interested in asking questions, we'll give it a couple more minutes. So from Jessica Powers, can an adjacent overlay regulation be imposed on sites very close, such as UNO being applied across the street?
No. There are a few instances in code where the adjacent zoning, the adjacent regulations will apply to a site, but I believe off the top of my head that's limited mostly to sites zoned P. So the park, like a park, basically. UNO, the site would have to have that as it would have to be within the UNO overlay to use those regulations. In cases where someone is asking for alternative equivalent compliance and it's adjacent to a site or an overlay like UNO or one of the TODs, we would suggest doing something design-wise that would relate to that overlay, but the overlay itself would not apply.
Thank you. And thanks for that question, Jessica. Our next question is, if DB90 is proposed for a NCCD, that's the neighborhood something something district, where it is normally prohibited, how would it take precedence? So what would take precedence, the DB90 or the NCCD?
Both. It depends. Typically speaking, the code that is added to a site, the additional letters will take precedence, but in instances where that overlay doesn't address a particular issue, then the base zoning would take precedence. So in this case, if you ended up with an NCCD DB90, like the Continental Club, And just as an example, because both address heights, but say DB90 doesn't address the height, then that's where the NCCD would come in. So it's not a blanket one completely controls over the other. It's more sort of an interwoven set of codes where each one ends up addressing a specific development standard within those overlays. It can make reviewing complicated at times.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's ever a conflict. 'Cause your example would be one where they're kind of in harmony, but have you seen cases where those two would be in conflict?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if there's a conflict, then the strictest one applies.
Okay. Good, that makes sense. All right, I have another question here from a different Anil. How does staff coordinate site plan review relative to other programs like Great Streets?
So urban design reviews for Great Streets compliance, and they are part of the overall review team. So when I talk about site plans being reviewed, it's not just my team reviewing the site plans. We review specific elements of them, but there's usually at least 12 other disciplines, utilities, transportation, drainage and water quality, environmental, also reviewing those. And if a site is within the bounds of where Great Streets applies, then it's being reviewed by an urban design reviewer while it's being reviewed by everyone else.
So in tandem as part of the entire process. Sounds good. All right, we'll give it a couple more minutes to see if any other questions come through. If anyone else has any more questions, now is your chance. Well, we've got Christine here with us. And thanks to everyone who's participated so far. Thank you all for being here with us. I want to remind you all again, the recording, Q&A summary, and the slide deck will be available. I'll be emailing those out to all of our attendees. And anyone who didn't attend is still going to have access to those recordings and slide deck. They are usually posted on the DSD public meetings page, and they're also going to be posted on the resources tab of the Land Development Academy webpage. So if there's not any other questions, I'll just go ahead and also remind you about the post-engagement survey. The QR is there, and I also just dropped the link in the chat. Let us know how we did. We're, constantly looking to improve and do the best that we can when we hold our engagements, and that'll keep us on track. And what else? If you have any additional questions, you had received the email address for Christine and her team. You can also always email DSD Communications if there's anything that comes up after, dsdcommunications@austintexas.gov, and we'll be happy to get you the information that you need. And finally, if you're interested in any further educational classes, you can check out the Land Development Academy webpage, which again, I posted in the chat. Our next course is scheduled for June 5th. That's going to be another webinar online, and it's going to be an environmental regulatory overview. And that's everything I have for you today. Thanks again for being here. And Christine, do you have any closing words for us?
No, just thank you to everyone who's sat through and all the questions. And if you think of any other questions later on, don't hesitate to email me.
All right. Thanks all. We'll see you next time.